endlessly searching for an original sound.
I'm just wondering if perhaps this site, the way it's laid out, is any better.
Oh, the one I sent at least knows how to use spaces.
You mean in
Good
between paragraphs?
grief.
Yes.
Good grief.
Yeah, you see why I like the one I... Again, you can use whichever one. They're the exact same wording.
We're on it. No, I found it. We're good.
Okay. It looks a little neater on screen. I am...
I don't know, I just saw the page on the stream and I'm like, dear God almighty.
Thank you. I said thank you.
Okay.
So do you guys want a little bit of Re-Animator? Quitters Inc. is a good one. Okay, you guys can start sending them to us. Put them in suggestions on Discord, and we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna be doing this all week. When Toast isn't and Shadow isn't around, I'll be doing them as well before South Park or after South Park.
Okay, I just saw Pikmin's model and I read that as Pikachu. I've been playing way too much Pokemon.
Just a little. So should we do this or should we look for something else?
I don't care. What the fuck is it? People...
Okay, so let me ask you guys in the chat. Would you rather Herbert West Re-Animator or would you rather the Telltale Heart? Yeah, I'm OCD mode. So we gotta let them catch up. Going on. What? Who pinged me? Oh. What are you doing, Snuggle Bunnies? What do you got? Come here.
What do you mean I'm unmotivated?
We got one for Re-Animator. We got two for Re-Animator. We got one for puppies. Oh, puppy tails.
Apparently I'm unmotivated.
Well, yeah, that's Shadow in a nutshell.
Yeah, pretty much.
Hi, honey. What's wrong? What's the matter, Miko? Are you gonna get scared of the scary story we're gonna tell? Alright, I'll start this one off.
Okay.
Chapter 1, From the Dark. Of Herbert West, who was my friend in college and in life after life, I can speak only with extreme terror. This terror is not due altogether to the sinister manner of his recent disappearance, but was engendered? Okay. By the whole nature of his work, and first gained its acute form more than 17 years ago, when we were in the third year of our course at the Miskatonic University Medical School in Arkham. While he was with me, the wonder and diabolism of his experiments fascinated me utterly, and I was his closest companion. Now that he is gone and the spell is broken, the actual fear is greater. Memories and possibilities are even more hideous than reality. The first horrible incident of our acquaintance was the greatest shock I ever experienced, and it is only with reluctance that I repeat it. As I have said, it happened when we were in the medical school, where West had already made himself notorious through his wild theories on the nature of death and the possibility of overcoming it artificially. His views, which were widely ridiculed by the faculty and his fellow students, hinge on the essentially mechanistic nature of life, and concern means of operating the organic machinery of mankind by calculated chemical action, after the failure of natural processes. In his experiments with various animating solutions, he had killed and treated immense numbers of rabbits, guinea pigs, cats, dogs, and monkeys, till he had become a prime nuisance for the college. Several times he had actually obtained signs of life in animals supposedly dead, in many cases violent signs, but he soon saw that the perfection of this process, if indeed possible, would if indeed where was I? Okay. Would necessarily involve a lifetime of research. It likewise became clear that since the same solution never worked alike on different organic species, he would require human subjects for further and more specialized processes. It was here that he first came into contact with the college authorities, and was debarred from future experiments by no less a dignitary than the dean of the medical school himself, the learned and benevolent Dr. Allen Heisley, whose work in behalf of the stricken is recalled by every old resident of Arkham. Hold on one moment. I had always been exceptionally tolerant of West's pursuits, and we frequently discussed his theories, whose ramifications and corollaries were almost infinite. Holding with Haeckel that all life is a chemical and physical process, and that the so-called soul is a myth, my friend believed that artificial reanimation of the dead can depend only on the condition of the tissue, and that unless actual decomposition has set in, a corpse fully equipped with organs may with suitable measures be set going again in the peculiar fashion known as life. That the psychic or intellectual life might be impaired by the slight deterioration of the sensitive brain cells which even a short period of death would be apt to cause, West fully realized. It had at first been his hope to find a reagent which would restore vitality before the actual advent of death, and only repeated failures on animals had shown him that the nature and artificial life motions were incompatible. He then sought extreme freshness in his specimens, injecting his solutions into the blood of immediately after the extinction of life. It was this circumstance which made the professor so carelessly skeptical, for they felt that true death had not occurred in any case. They did not stop to view the matter closely and reasoningly. It was not long after the facility had interdicted his work that West confided to me his resolution to get fresh human bodies in some manner and continue in secret the experiments he could no longer perform openly. Okay, does anyone want to take the last part of this into the next page?
Okay. To hear him discussing ways and means was rather ghastly, for at the college we never procured anatomical specimens ourselves. Whenever the morgue proved inadequate, 2 loco negros attended to this matter, and they were seldom questioned. West was then a small, slender, spectacled youth with delicate features, yellow hair, pale blue eyes, and soft voice, and it was uncanny to hear him dwelling on the relative merits of Christ Church Cemetery and the Potter's Field. We finally decided on the Potter's Field because practically every body in Christ Church was embalmed, a thing of course ruinous to West's research. I was by this time his active and enthralled assistant, and helped him to make all his decisions, not only concerning the source of bodies, but concerning a suitable place for our loathsome work. It was I who thought of the deserted Chapman farmhouse beyond Meadow Hill, where we fitted up on the ground floor an operating room and laboratory, each with dark curtains to conceal our midnight doings. The place was far from any road, and in no sight of any other house. Yet precautions were nonetheless necessary, since rumors of strange lights, started by chance nocturnal rumors, would soon bring disaster on our enterprise. It was agreed to call the whole thing a chemical laboratory, if discovery should occur. Gradually, we equipped our sinister haunt of science with materials either purchased in Boston or quietly borrowed from the college, materials carefully made unrecognizable save to expert eyes, and provided spades and picks for many burials, we should have to make in the cellar. At the college we used an incinerator, but the apparatus was too costly for our unauthorized laboratory. Bodies were always a nuisance, even the small guinea pig bodies from the slight clandestine experiments in West's room at the boarding house. We followed the local death notices like ghouls, for our specimens demanded particular qualities. What we wanted were corpses interred soon after death without artificial preservation, preferably free from malforming disease, and certainly with all organs present. Accident victims were our best hope. Not for many weeks did we hear of anything suitable, though we talked with the morgue and hospital authorities ostensibly in the college's interest, as often as we could without exciting suspicion. We found that the college had first choice in every case, so it might be necessary to remain in Arkham during the summer, when only the limited summer school classes were held. In the end, though, luck favored us, for one day we heard of an almost ideal case in the Potter's Field. A brawny young workman drowned only the morning before in Summer's Pond and buried at the town's expense without delay or embalming. That afternoon we found the new grave, and determined to begin work soon after midnight. It was a repulsive task that we undertook in the black, small hours, even though we lacked at that time the special horror of graveyards which later experiences brought to us. We carried spades and oiled dark lanterns, for although electric torches were then manufactured, they were not as satisfactory as the tungsten contrivers of today. The process of unearthing was slow and sordid. It might have been gruesomely poetical if we had been artists instead of scientists, and we were glad when our spades struck wood. When the pine box was fully uncovered, Wes scrambled down and removed the lid, dragging out and propping up the contents. I reached down and hauled the contents out of the grave, and then both toiled hard to restore the spot to its former appearance. The affair made us rather nervous, especially the stiff form and vacant face of our first trophy, but we managed to remove all traces of our visit. When we had patted down the last shovelful of earth, we put the specimen in a dark canvas sack and set up for the old Chapman place beyond Meadow Hill. On an improvised dissecting table of the old farmhouse, by the light of a powerful alkaline lamp, the specimen was not very spectral looking. It had been sturdy and apparently unimaginative youth, of a wholesome plebeian type, large-framed, gray-eyed, and brown-haired, a sound animal without psychological subtleties, and probably having vital processes of simplest and healthiest sort. Now, with the eyes closed, looked more asleep than dead, though the expert test of my friends soon left no doubt on that score. We had at last what West had always longed for, a real dead man in the ideal kind, ready for the solution as prepared according to the most careful calculations and theories for human use. The tension on our part became very great. We knew that there was scarcely a chance for anything like complete success, and could not avoid hideous fears at possible grotesque results of partial animation. Especially were we apprehensive concerning the mind and impulses of the creature, since in the space following the death of some of the more delicate cerebral cells might have well suffered deterioration. I myself held some curious notions about the traditional soul of a man, and felt in awe at the secrets that might be told by one returning from the dead. I wondered what sights this placid youth might have seen in inaccessible spheres, and what he could relate if fully restored to life. But my wonder was not overwhelming, since for the most part I shared the materialism of my friend. He was calmer than I, and as he forced a large quantity of his fluid into the vein of the body's arm, immediately binding the incision securely. The waiting was gruesome, but West never faltered. Every now and then he applied his stethoscope to the specimen and bore the negative results philosophically. After about 3/4 of an hour, without the least sign of life, he disappointedly pronounced the solution inadequate, but determined to make the most of his opportunity and try to change in the formula before disposing of this ghastly prize. We had that afternoon dug a grave in the cellar, and would have to fill it by dawn, for although we had fixed a lock on the house, we wished to shun even the remotest risk of foolish discovery. Besides, the body would not even be approximately fresh the next night. So taking the solitary alkaline lamp to the adjacent laboratory, we left our silent guests on the side in the dark, and bent every energy to mixing of the new solution, the weighing and measuring supervised by West with an almost fanatical care. The awful event was very sudden and wholly unexpected. I was pouring something from one test tube to another, and West was busy over the alcohol blast lamp, which had to answer for a Bunsen burner in this gaseous edifice. When from the pitch-black room we had left, there burst the most appalling and demonic succession of cries that either of us had ever heard. Not more unutterable would have been the chaos of hellish sound if the pit itself had opened to release some agony of the damned. For in one inconceivable cacophony was centered all the supernatural terror and unnatural despair of animate nature. Human it could not have been. It was not in a man to make such sounds, and without a thought of our late employment, or its possible discovery, both West and I leapt to the nearest window like stricken animals, overturning tubes, lamps, and retorts, and vaulting madly into the stared abyss of the rural night. I think we screamed ourselves as we stumbled frantically toward the town, but as we reached the outskirts we put on a semblance of restraint, just enough to seem like belated revelers staggering home from a debauch. We did not separate, but managed to get into West's room. We whispered with the gas up until dawn. By then we had calmed ourselves a little with rational theories and plans for investigation, so that we could sleep through the day, classes being disregarded. But that evening 2 items in the paper, wholly unrelated, made it again impossible for us to sleep. The old deserted Chapman house had been inexplicably burned to an amorphous heap of ashes that we could understand because of an upset lamp. Also, an attempt had been made to disturb a new grave in the potter's field, as if by futile and spateless clawing of the earth that we could not understand, for we had pounded down the mold very carefully. And for 17 years after that, West would look frequently over his shoulder and complain of fancied footsteps behind him. Now he's disappeared.
Shadow, you just kept going, didn't you?
Yeah, I kind of did.
You like it, don't you?
It wasn't bad.
I was waiting for the chance to steal it.
Okay,
and
so
it
I think
never
we
came.
should each... Alright, so I'm going to change this. I think we should each do a chapter, because it seems like everyone's going to really get into reading their part. So, Toast, if you want to do it that way.
How many pages did I actually read?
You did, too.
Oh, short.
Yeah. So, if you want to do it like that, Toast, your chapter's next, and then I'll do a chapter, and then Shadow will take over everything else, because he seems really into the story, which actually makes me happy.
It was a good one.
It's not over yet.
Oh.
So the plague daemon would be mine.
Yes.
Okay. I shall never forget that hideous summer 16 years ago, when, like a noxious affright from the halls of Iblis, typhoid stalked leeringly through Arkham. It is by that satanic scourge that the most recall the year, for truly terror brooded with bat wings over the piles of coffins in the tombs of Christchurch Cemetery. Yet for me, there's a greater horror in that time, a horror known to me alone, now that Herbert West has disappeared. West and I were doing postgraduate work in summer classes at the medical school of Miskatonic University, and my friend had attained a wide notoriety because of his experiments leading toward the revivification of the dead. After the scientific slaughter of uncounted small animals, the freakish work had ostensibly stopped by order of our skeptical dean, Dr. Alan Hazley, though West had continued to perform certain secret tests in his dingy boarding house room, and had, on one terrible and unforgettable occasion, taken a human body from its grave in the potter's field to a deserted farmhouse beyond Meadow Hill. I was with him on that odious occasion, and saw him inject into the still veins the elixir which he thought would to some extent restore life's chemical and physical processes. It had ended horribly, in a delirium of fear, which we gradually came to attribute to our own overwrought nerves. And West had never afterward been able to shake off a maddening sensation of being haunted and hunted. The body had not been quite fresh enough. It is obvious that to restore normal mental attributes to a body, it is obvious that to restore mental attributes to a body must be very fresh indeed, and the burning of the old house had prevented us from burying the thing. It would have been better if we could have known it was underground. After that experience, West had dropped his researches for some time, but as the zeal of the born scientist slowly returned, he again became important with the college faculty, pleading for the use of the dissecting room and of fresh human specimens for the work he regarded as so overwhelmingly important. His pleas, however, were wholly in vain, for the decision of Dr. Hazley was inflexible, and other professors all endorsed the verdict of their leader. In the radical theory of reanimation, they saw nothing but the immature vagaries of a youthful enthusiast whose slight form, yellow hair, spectacled blue eyes, and soft voice gave no hint of supernormal, almost diabolical power of the cold brain within. I can see him now as he was then, and I shiver. He grew a sterner face, but never elderly, and now Sefton Asylum has had the mishap, and West has vanished. West clashed disagreeably with Dr. Hazley near the end of our last undergraduate term, in a wordy dispute that did less credit to him than to the kindly dean in point of courtesy. He felt that he was needlessly and irrationally retarded in a supremely. I had to reread that.
You couldn't get it, could you?
It was
You tried.
Needlessly and irrationally retarded. I thought it was going to say regarded in a different sentence ending, but retarded.
Well, this is Lovecraft for you. Remember, he wasn't too happy about writing this story.
He felt that he was needlessly and irrationally retarded, and a supremely great work. A work which he could of course conduct to suit himself in later years, but which he wished to begin while still possessed of the exceptional facilities of the university. That the tradition-bound elders should ignore his singular results on animals and persist in their denial of the possibility of reanimation was inexpressibly disgusting and almost incomprehensible to the youth of West's logical temperament. Only greater maturity could help him understand the chronic mental limitations of Professor-Doctor type, the product of generations of pathetic puritanism, kindly, conscientious, and sometimes gentle and amiable, yet always narrow, intolerant, custom-ridden, and lacking in perspective. Age has more charity for these incomplete yet high-souled characters, whose worst real vice is timidity, and who are ultimately punished by general ridicule for their intellectual sins like Tomlicism. I've never known how to pronounce that name because it comes from Toll or whatever his face is. Calvinism and anti-Darwinism, anti-Nietzscheism, and every sort of Sabbatarianism and sumptuary legislation. West, young despite his marvelous scientific acquirements, had scant patience with good Dr. Hazley and his erudite colleague, and nursed an increasing resentment coupled with the desire to prove his theories to these obtuse worthies. I've never seen worthies used like that. Obtuse worthies in some striking and dramatic fashion. Like most youths, he indulged in elaborate daydreams of revenge, triumph, and final, magnanimous forgiveness. And then had come the scourge, grinning and lethal, from the nightmare caverns of Tartarus, West and I graduated about the time of its beginning, but had remained for additional work at the summer school, so that we were in Arkham when it broke with full demonic fury upon the town. Though not as yet licensed physicians, we now had our degrees and were pressed frantically into public service as the numbers of stricken grew. The situation was almost past management, and deaths ensued too frequently for the local undertakers fully to handle. Burials without embalming were made in rapid succession, and even the Christchurch cemetery receiving tomb was crammed with coffins of the unembalmed dead. This circumstance was not without effect on West, who thought often of the irony of the situation. So many fresh specimens, yet none for his persecuted researches. We were frightfully overworked, and the terrific mental and nervous strain made my friend brood morbid. But West's gentle. But West's gentle enemies
Say
were
Gentile. You just want to say Gentile.
Gentile.
There you go.
But West's gentle enemies were no less harassed with prostrating duties. College had all but closed, and every doctor of the medical faculty was helping to fight the typhoid plague. Dr. Hazley, in particular, had distinguished himself in sacrificing service, applying his extreme skill with wholehearted energy to cases which many others shunned because of the danger or apparent hopelessness. Before a month was over, fearless Dean had become a popular hero, though he seemed unconscious of his fame as he struggled to keep from collapsing with physical fatigue and nervous exhaustion. West could not withhold admiration for the fortitude of his foe, but because of this was even more determined to prove him the truth of his amazing doctrine. Taking advantage of the disorganization of both college work and municipal health regulations, he managed to get recently deceased bodies smuggled into the university dissecting room one night, and in my presence, injected a few modification of his solution. The thing actually opened its eyes, but only stared at the ceiling with a look of a soul-petrifying horror, before collapsing into an inertness from which nothing could rouse it. West said it was not fresh enough. The hot summer air does not favor corpses. That time we were almost caught before we incinerated the thing, and West doubted the advisability of repeating his daring misuse of the college laboratory. The peak of the epidemic was reached in August. West and I were almost dead, and Dr. Hazley did die on the 14th. The students all attended the hasty funeral on the 15th and bought an impressive wreath, though the latter was quite overshadowed by the tributes sent by the wealthy Arkham citizens and by the municipality itself. It was almost a public affair, for the dean had surely been a public benefactor. After his entombment, we were all somewhat depressed, and spent the afternoon at the bar of the commercial house, where West, though shaken by the death of his chief opponent, chilled the rest of us with references to his notorious theories. Most of the students went home or to various duties as the evening advanced, but West persuaded me to aid him in making a night of it. West's landlady saw us arrive at his room about 2 a.m, and the third man between us, and told her husband that we had all evidently dined and wined rather well. Totally not a dead body. Apparently this acidulous matron was right, for about 3 a.m. the whole house was aroused by cries coming from West's room, where when they broke down the door they found 2 of us unconscious on the blood-stained carpet, beaten, scratched, and mauled, and with the broken remnants of West's bottles and instruments around us. Only an open window told what had become of our assailant, and many wondered how he himself had fared after the terrific leap from the second story to the lawn, which he must have made. There were some strange garments in the room, but West, upon regaining consciousness, said they did not belong to the stranger. They were specimens collected for the bacterial analysis in the course of the investigations on the transmission of germ diseases. He ordered them burnt as soon as possible in capacious fireplace. To the police, we both declared ignorance of our late companion's identity. He was, West nervously said, a congenial stranger whom we had met at some downtown bar of uncertain location. We had all been rather jovial, and West and I did not wish for our pugnacious companion hunted down. That same night saw the beginning of the second Arkham horror, the horror that, to me, eclipsed the plague itself. Christchurch Cemetery was the scene of a terrible killing, a watchman having been clawed to death in a manner not too hideous for description, but raising a doubt as to the human agency of the dead, or of the deed. The victim had been seen alive considerably after midnight. The dawn revealed the unutterable thing. The manager of a circus at the neighboring town of Bolton was questioned, but he swore that he saw no beast had at any time escaped from its cage. Those who found the body noted the trail of blood leading to the receiving tomb, where a small pool of red lay on the concrete just outside the gate. A fainter trail led away toward the woods, but it soon gave out. The next night, devils danced on the roofs of Arkham, and unnatural madness howled in the wind. Through the fevered town had crept a curse which some had said was greater than the plague, and which some whispered was the embodied demon soul of the plague itself. 8 houses were entered by the nameless thing, which stewed in red death in its wake, and all 17 maimed and shapeless remnants of bodies were left behind by the voiceless, sadistic monster that crept abroad. A few persons had half seen it in the dark, and said it was white like a malformed ape or anthropomorphic fiend. It had not left behind quite all that it had attacked, for sometimes it had been hungry. The number it has killed was 14. 3 of the bodies had been in stricken homes and had not been alive. On the 3rd night, frantic bands of searchers, led by the police, captured it in the house on Crane Street near the Miskatonic campus. They had organized the quest with care, keeping in touch by means of volunteer telephone stations, and when someone in the college district had reported hearing a scratching at the shuttered window, the net was quickly spread. On account of the general alarm and precautions, there were only 2 more victims, and the capture was effected without major casualties. The thing was finally stopped by a bullet, though not a fatal one, and was rushed to the local hospital amidst universal excitement and loathing. For it had been a man. This much was clear despite the nauseous size, the voiceless simianism, and the demonic savagery. They dressed its wounds and carted it to the asylum at Sefton, where it beat its head against the walls of the padded cell for 16 years, until the recent mishap, when it escaped under circumstances that few like to mention. What had most disgusted the searchers of Arkham was the thing that they noticed when the monster's face was cleaned, the mocking, unbelievable resemblance to a learned and self-sacrificing martyr who had been entombed but 3 days before, the late Dr. Allen Hazley, public benefactor and dean of the medical school of Miskatonic University. To the vanished Herbert West, and to me, the disgust and horror were supreme. I shudder tonight as I think of it, shudder even more than I did the morning when West muttered through his bandages, "Damn it, it wasn't quite fresh enough."
Alright, my turn. Chapter 3 6 Shots by Midnight. It is uncommon to fire all 6 shots of a revolver with great suddenness, when one would probably be sufficient. But many things in the life of Herbert West were uncommon. It is, for instance, not often that a young physician leaving college is obliged to conceal the principles which guide his selection of a home and office. Yet that was the case with Herbert West. When he and I obtained our degree at the medical school in Miskatonic University and sought to relieve our poverty by setting up as general practitioners, we took great care not to say that we chose our house because it was fairly well isolated and as near as possible to Potter's Field. Give me a second. Radiance such as this is seldom without a cause, nor indeed was ours, for our requirements were those resulting for a life work distinctly unpopular. Outwardly we were doctors, only but beneath the surface were aims of far greater and more terrible moments, for the essence of Herbert West's existence was a quest amid black and forbidden realms of the unknown, in which he had hoped to uncover the secrets of life and restore to perpetually animation the wait, yep, graveyard's cold clay. Such a quest demands strange materials, among them fresh human bodies, and in order to keep supplied with these indispensable things, one must live quietly and not far from the place of informal interment. West and I met in college. West and I met in college, and I had been the only one to sympathize with his hideous experiments. Gradually I had come to be his inseparable assistant, and now that we were out of college we had to keep together. It was not easy to find a good opening for two doctors in company, but finally the influence of the university secured us a practice in Bolton, a factory town near Arkham. The seat of the college, the Bolton Worston Mills, are the largest in Miskatonic Valley, and their polyglot employees are never popular as patients with the local physicians. We chose our house with the greatest care, seizing at least one a rather run-down cottage near the end of Pond Street, 5 numbers from the closest neighbor, and separated from the local potter's field by only a stretch of meadows land, bisected by a narrow neck of the rather dense forest which lies to the north. The distance was greater than we wished, but we could get no further near the house without going on the other side of the field, wholly without the factories district. We were not much displeased, however, since there were no people between us and our sinister source of supplies. The walk was a trifle long, but we could haul our silent specimens undisturbed. Our practice was surprisingly large, from the very first, large enough to please most young doctors, and large enough to prove a bore and a burden to students whose real interest lay elsewhere. The mill hands were of somewhat turbulent inclinations, and besides their many natural needs, their frequent clashes and stabbings of phrase gave us plenty to do. But what actually absorbed our minds was the secret laboratory we had fitted up in the cellar. The laboratory with the long tube under the electric lights, where in the small hours of the morning we often injected Wes's various solutions into the veins of things we dragged from the potter's field. West was experimenting madly to find something which would start men's vital motions anew after they had been stopped by the thing we called death, but had encountered the most ghastly obstacles. The solution had to be differently compounded for different types. What would serve for a guinea pig would not serve for a human being, and different human specimens required large modifications. The body had to be exceedingly fresh, or the slight decomposition of brain tissue would render perfect reanimation impossible. Indeed, the greatest problem was to get them fresh enough. West had had a terrible experience during his secret college research with corpses of doubtful vintage. The result of partial or imperfect animations were much more hideous than were the fatal failures, and we both held fearsome recollections of such things. Fuck. Did I really? Yep, there we go. Ever since our first demonic session in the deserted farmhouse on Meadow Hill in Arkham, we had felt a brooding menace, and West, though a calm, blond, blue-eyed scientific. Okay, I lost my place. Hold on. Sorry. Okay, there we go. Automotion, in most respects, often confessed to a shuddering sensation of stealthy pursuit. He half felt that he was followed, a psychological delusion of shaken nerves, enhanced by the undeniably disturbing fact that the last one of our reanimated specimens was still alive, a frightful carnivorous thing in a padded cell at Softon. Then there was another, our first, whose exact fate we never had learned. We had fair luck with the specimens in Bolton, much better than in Arkham. We had not settled a week before we got an accident victim on the very night of burial, and made it open its eyes with an amazingly rational expression before the solution failed. It had lost an arm. If it had been a perfect body, we might have succeeded better. Between then and the next January, we secured 3 more, 1 total failure, 1 case of marked muscular motion, and 1 rather shivery thing. It rose of itself and uttered a sound. Then came a period when luck was poor. Interments fell off, and those that did occur were of specimens either too diseased or too maimed for use. We kept track of all deaths and their circumstances with systematic care. One March night, however, we unexpectedly obtained a specimen which did not come from Potter's Field. In Bolton, the prevailing spirit of Puritanism had outlawed the sport of boxing, with the usual results. Superstitious and ill-conducted bouts among the mill workers were common, and occasionally professional talent of low grade was imported. This late winter night there had been such a match, evidently with disastrous results, since 2 timorous Poles had come to us with incoherently whispered entreaties to attend to a very secret and desperate case. We followed them to an abandoned barn, where the remnants of a crowd of frightened foreigners were watching a silent black form on the floor. The match had been between Kid O'Brien, a lubberly and now quaking youth with most Hibernian hook nose. Unhibernian? What the fuck does that mean? Toast? And Buck Robinson, a Harlem smoke. The Negro, okay? Okay, I can do this. The Negro had been knocked out, and the moment's exclamation showed us that he would permanently remain so. He was a loathsome gorilla-like thing. Wow. With abnormally long arms, which I could not help calling for legs. Wow. And face that conjured up thoughts of unspeakable Congo secrets and tom-tom poundings under the eerie moon. The body must have looked even worse in life, but the world holds many ugly things. Fear was upon the whole pitiful crowd, for they did not know that the law would exact of them if their affair were not hushed up, and they were grateful when West, in spite of my involuntary shudders, offered to get rid of the thing quietly for a purpose I knew all too well. There was bright moonlight over the snowless landscape, but we dressed the thing and carried it home between us. The deserted streets and meadows, as we carried a similar thing, and we carried it home between similar thing one horrible night in Arkham. We approached the house from the field in the rear, took the specimen in the back door and down the cellar stairs, and prepared it for the usual experiments. Our fear of the police was absolutely great, though we had timed our trip to avoid the solitary patrolmen on the section. The result was warily anticlimactic. Ghastly as our prize appeared, it was wholly unresponsive to every solution we injected in its black arm. Solutions prepared from experience with white specimens only. So it was like a person, only darker.
Hey, Purity.
Yep.
Earlier, I was muted, and I forgot that I was muted, but I answered you. On Hibernian, it means not of Ireland. So he's King O'Brien, who's not from Ireland at all.
Okay.
Now that you mentioned that you've been muted, yeah.
You too?
Yeah. Because I got up to go change and then go to the bathroom, and I just forgot to unmute myself when I got hit back, but she was reading, so I wasn't saying anything.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't even looking at the. I wasn't even looking at the chats. Yeah, we can kind of tell that, but let's get back to this. It was a person, only darker.
Jesus Christ.
It's funnier only because of what Toast and I were talking about yesterday. So, as the hour grew dangerously near to dawn, we had, as we had done with the others, dragged the thing across the meadows to the neck of the woods near Potter's Field, and buried it there in the best sort of grave the frozen ground would furnish. The grave was not very deep, but fully as good as that of the previous specimen, the thing which had risen itself and uttered a sound. In the light of our dark lanterns, we carefully covered it with leaves and dead vines, carefully certain that the police would never find it in the forest so dim and dense. The next day I was increasingly apprehensive about the police, for the patients brought rumors of suspects, spite, and death. West had still another source of worry, for he had been called in the afternoon to a case which ended very threateningly. An Italian woman had become hysterical over her missing child, a lad of 5 who had strayed off early in the morning and failed to appear for dinner, and he had developed symptoms highly alarming in view of an always weak heart. Damn dog. It was a very foolish hysteria, for the boy had often run away before. But Italian peasants, peasants are exceedingly superstitious, and this woman seemed as much harassed by omens as by facts. Damn Lovecraft. About 7 o'clock in the evening she had died, and her frantic husband had made a frightful scene in his efforts to kill West. Whom he wildly blamed for not saving her life. Friends had held him when he drew his stiletto, but West departed amidst his inhuman shrieks, curses, and oaths of vengeance. In his latest affliction, the fellow seemed to have forgotten his child, who was still missing as the night advanced. There was some... Damn it. Oops, sorry. Oh, crap, I lost my place. One moment. There was some talk of searching the woods, but most of the family's friends were busy with the dead woman and the screaming man. Altogether, the nervous strain upon West must have been tremendous. Thoughts of police and of the mad Italian both weighed heavily. We retired about 11, but did not sleep. Well. Bolton had a surprisingly good police force for so small a town, and I could not help fearing the mass which would ensue if the affair of the night before were ever tracked down. It might mean the end of our local work, and perhaps prison for both West and me. I did not like those rumors of a fight which were floating about. After the clock had struck 3, the moon shone in my eyes, but I turned over without fuck. Sorry, guys. No, I had it right. I'm retarded. Okay. But I turned over without rising to pull the shades down. Then came the steady rattling of the back door. I tried to make a rattling sound. It didn't work. I lay still and somewhat dazed, but before long heard West rap on my door. He was clad in dressing gown and slippers, and had in his hands a revolver with an electric flashlight. From the revolver I knew that he was thinking more of the crazed Italian than the police. "We'd better both go," he whispered. "It wouldn't do not to answer it anyway, and it may be a patient. It would be like one of those fools to try the back door." We both went down the stairs on tiptoe, with the fear partly justified and partly that which comes only from the soul of the weird small hours. The rattling continued, growing somewhat louder. When we reached the door, I cautiously unbolted it and threw it open, and as the moon streamed revealingly down on the form silhouetted there, West did a peculiar thing. Despite the obvious dangers of attracting notice and bringing down on our heads the dread police investigation, a thing which after all was mercifully averted by the relative isolation of our cottage, my friend suddenly, excitedly, and unnecessarily emptied all 6 chambers of a revolver into the nocturnal visitor. For that visitor was neither Italian nor policeman. Looming hideously against the spectral moon was a gigantic misshapen thing, not to be imagined save in nightmares, a glassy-eyed, ink-black apparition, nearly on all fours, covered with bits of mold, leaves and vines, foul with caked blood, and having between its glistening teeth a snow-white, terrible, cynical object, tormenting in a tiny hand. It was like a person, only darker, and eating other
tiny.
people.
Only smaller.
It really
It had
wanted
a tiny
Italian
hand.
food.
Tiny hand.
I said tiny hand.
Tiny hand.
Tiny
He
hand.
has a tiny hand.
You just love that part, don't you?
Chapter 4. The Scream of the Dead. The scream of the dead man gave to me an acute and added horror of Dr. Herbert West, which harassed in the later years of our companionship. It is natural for such a thing that a dead man's scream should give horror, for it is obviously not a pleasing or ordinary occurrence. But I was used to similar experiences, hence suffered on this occasion only because of a particular circumstance. And as I replied, it was not of the dead man himself that I became afraid. Herbert West, whose associate and assistant I was, posed scientific interests far beyond the usual routine of a village physician. That was why, when establishing his practice in Bolton, he had chosen an isolated house near the Potter's Field. Briefly and brutally stated, West's sole absorbing interest was the secret study of the phenomena of life and its cessation, leading toward the reanimation of the dead through injections of the excellent solution. For this ghastly experimentation, it was necessary to have a constant supply of very fresh human bodies. Very fresh because even the least decay hopelessly damaged the brain structure, and human because we found that the solution had to be compounded differently for different types of organisms. Scores of rabbits and guinea pigs had been killed and treated, but their trial was a blind one. West had never fully succeeded because he had never fully been able to secure a corpse sufficiently fresh. What he wanted were bodies from which vitality had only just departed. Bodies with every cell intact, capable of receiving again the impulse toward that motion called life. There was hope that this second artificial life might be made perpetual by repetitions of this injection, but we had learned that an ordinary natural life would not respond to the action. To establish artificial motion, natural life must be extinct. The specimens must be very fresh but genuinely dead. The awesome quest had begun when West and I were students in Miskatonic University Medical School in Arkham, vividly conscious for the first time of the thorough mechanical nature of life. That was 7 years before, but West looked scarcely a day older now. He was small, blond, clean-shaven, soft-voiced, and spectacled, with only the occasional flash of cold blue eye to tell of the hardening and growing fanaticism of his character under pressure of his terrible investigations. Our experiences had often been hideous in the extreme. The results of defective reanimation and lumps of graveyard clay had been galvanized into morbid, unnatural, and brainless motion by various modifications of the vital solution. One thing had uttered a nerve-shattering scream, another had risen violently, beaten us both to unconsciousness, and run amok in a shocking way before it could be placed behind the silent bars. And still another, a loathsome African monstrosity, had clawed out of its shallow grave and done a deed that West had to shoot that object. We could not get bodies fresh enough to shew any trace of reason when animated, so had perforce created nameless horrors. It was disturbing to think that one, perhaps two of our monsters still lived. That thought haunted us shadowingly, till finally West disappeared under frightful circumstances. But at that time, the scream in the cellar laboratory of the isolated Bolton cottage, our fears were subordinate to our anxiety for extremely fresh specimens. West was more avid than I, so that it almost seemed to me that he looked half covetously at any very healthy living physique. It was July 1910 that the bad luck regarding specimens began to turn. I had been on a long visit to my parents in Illinois, and upon my return found West in a state of singular elation. He had, he told me excitedly, in all likelihood solved the problem of freshness through an approach from an entirely new angle, that of artificial preservation. I had known that he was working with a new, highly unusual embalming compound, and was not surprised that it had turned out well, until he explained the details. I was rather puzzled how such a compound could work in our work, or help in our work, since the objectionable staleness of the specimens was largely due to delay occurring before we secured them. This, I now saw, West had clearly recognized, creating his embalming compound for our future rather than immediate use, and trusting to fate to supply again some very recent and unburied corpse, as it had years before, when we obtained the Negro killed in the Bolton prize fight. At last fate had been kind, so that on this occasion there lay in the secret cellar laboratory a corpse whose decay could not by any possibility have been begun. What would happen on reanimation, and whether we could hope for a revival of mind and reason, West did not venture to predict. The experiment would be a landmark in our studies, and we had saved the new body from our return, so that both might share the spectacle of custom fashion. Sorry, give me a second. Oh, Jesus. Anyway, West told me how he had obtained the specimen. He'd been a vigorous man, well-dressed stranger just off the train on his way to transact some business with the Bolton Worst Mills. The walk through town had been long, and by the time the traveler paused at our cottage to ask the way to the factories, his heart had become gravely overtaxed. He had refused a stimulant, and had suddenly dropped dead only a moment later. The body, as might be expected, seemed to West a heaven-sent gift. In his brief conversation, the stranger had made it clear that he was unknown in Bolton, and a search of his pockets subsequently revealed him to be Robert Levitt of St. Louis, apparently without family, to make instant inquiries about his disappearance. If this man could not be restored to life, no one would know of our experiment. We buried our materials in a dense strip of the woods between the house and the potter's field. If, on the other hand, he could be restored, our fame would be brilliantly and perpetually established. So without delay, West had injected the body's wrist the compound which would hold it fresh until after my arrival. The matter of presumably weak heart, which to my mind imperiled the success of our experiment, did not appear to trouble West extensively. He hoped to at last to obtain what he had never obtained before, a rekindled spark of reason and perhaps a normal living creature. So on the night of July 18th, 1910, Herbert West and I stood in the cellar laboratory and gazed at a white, silent figure beneath the dazzling arc light. The embalming compound had worked uncannily well, for as I stared frenetically,
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
It's alright. Where was I? The compound had worked uncannily well, for as I stared fascinatedly at the sturdy frame which had lain 2 weeks without stiffening as I moved to seek West's assurance that the thing was really dead, this assurance he gave readily enough, reminding me that the remaining solution was never used without careful tests as to life, since it could have no effect if any of the originally vitals were present. As West proceeded to take preliminary steps, I was impressed by the vast intricacy of the new experiment, an intricacy so vast that he could trust no hand less delicate than his own. Forbidding me to touch the body, he first injected the drug into the wrist, decided to place the needle he had punctured when injecting the embalming compound. This, he said, was to neutralize the compound and release the system to a normal relaxation so the reanimating solution might work freely when injected. Slightly later, when the change and a gentle tremor seemed to affect the dead limbs, West stuffed a pillow-like object violently over the twitching face, not withdrawing it till the corpse appeared quiet and ready for our attempt at reanimation. The pale enthusiast now applied some less perfunctory tests for absolute lifelessness, withdrew satisfied, and finally injected in the left arm an acutely measured amount of vital elixir, prepared during the afternoon with greater care than we had used since college days, when our feet were new and groping. I cannot express the wild, breathless suspense with which we waited for results in the first really fresh fucking goddamn it. First really fresh specimen. Fuck. Why couldn't I say that line? The first we could reasonably expect to open its lips in rational speech, perhaps to tell of what it had seen beyond the unfathomable abyss. West was a materialist, believing in no soul, and attributing all the working of consciousness to bodily phenomena. Consequently, he looked for no revelation of hideous secrets from the gulfs and caverns beyond death's barrier. Fuck. I did not wholly disagree with him, theoretically, yet held vague instinctive remnants of the primitive faith of my forefathers, so I could not help but eyeing the corpse with certain amounts of awe and terrible expectation. Besides, I could not extract the memory from that hideous, inhuman shriek we heard on the night we tried our first experiment in the deserted farmhouse at Arthur. Very little time had elapsed before I saw the attempt was not to be a total failure. A touch of color came to the cheeks, hair to wither chalk white, and spread out under a curiously ample stubble of sandy beard. West, who had his hand on his pulse of the left wrist, suddenly nodded significantly, and almost simultaneously a mist appeared on the mirror inclined above the body's mouth. There followed a few spasmodic muscular motions, then an audible breathing and visible motion of the chest. I looked at the closed eyelids and thought I detected a quivering. Then the lids opened, shewing eyes which were gray, calm, and alive, but still unintelligent and not even curious. In a moment of fantastic whim, I whispered questions to the reddening ears, questions of other worlds which memory might still be present. Subsequent terror drove me from my mind, but I think the last one, which I repeated, was, "Where have you been?" I do not yet know whether I was answered or not, for no sound came from the well-shaped mouth, but I do know that at that moment I firmly thought the thin lips moved silently, forming syllables I would have vocalized as "only now," if that phrase had possessed any sense or relevancy. At that moment, as I say, I was elated with the conviction that one great goal had been attained, and for that the first time the reanimated corpse had uttered distinct words, impelled by actual reason. In the next moment there was no doubt about the triumph, no doubt the solution had truly accomplished, at least temporarily, its full mission of restoring rational and articulate life to the dead. But in that triumph there came to me the greatest of all horrors. Not horror of the thing it spoke, but of the deed that I had just witnessed in the man whom my professional fortunes were joined. For that very fresh body, at last writhing into full and terrifying consciousness, with eyes dilated at the memory of its last scene on earth, threw out its frantic hands in a life-death struggle with the air, suddenly collapsing into a second and final dissolution, from which there could be no return, screamed out the cry that will ring eternally in my aching brain. Help! Keep off, you cursed little towhead fiend! Keep that damned needle away from me!
My turn or toast? I guess toast.
It'd be my turn.
Mm-hmm.
Many men have related hideous things, not mentioned in print, which happened on the battlefields of the Great War. Some of these things have made me faint. Others have convulsed me with devastating nausea, while still others have made me tremble and look behind me in the dark. Yet, despite the worst of them, I believe I can myself relate to the most hideous thing of all, the shocking, the unnatural, the unbelievable horror from the shadow. In 1915, I was a physician with the rank of first lieutenant in the Canadian regime in Flanders, one of many Americans to precede the government itself into the gigantic struggle. I had not entered the army on my own initiative, but rather as the natural result of the enlistment of the man whose indispensable assistant I was, the celebrated Boston surgical specialist, Dr. Herbert West. Dr. West had been avid for a chance to serve as surgeon in the Great War, and when the chance had come, he carried me with him almost against my will. There were reasons why I would have been glad to let the war separate us, reasons why I found the practice of medicine and the companionship of West more and more irritating. But when he had gone to Ottawa and through the college's influence secured a medical commission as major, I could not resist the imperious persuasion of one determined that I should accompany him in my usual capacity. When I say that Dr. West was avid to serve in battle, I do not mean to imply that he was either naturally warlike or anxious for the safety of civilization. Always an ice-cold intellectual machine, slight, blonde, blue-eyed, and I think he secretly sneered at my occasional martial enthusiasms and censures of supine neutrality. There was, however, something he wanted to embattle Flanders, and in order to secure it, he had to assume a military exterior. What he wanted was not a thing that many persons want, but something connected with the peculiar branch of medical science which he had chosen quite clandestinely to follow, and in which he had achieved amazing and occasionally hideous results. It was, in fact, nothing more or less than an abundant supply of freshly killed men in every stage of dismemberment. Herbert West needed fresh bodies because his life work was the reanimation of the dead. This work was not known to the fashionable clientele who had so swiftly built up his fame after his arrival in Boston, but was only too well known to me, who had been his closest friend and sole assistant since the days in Miskatonic University Medical School at Arkham. It was in those college days that he had begun his terrible experiments, first on small animals and then on human bodies shockingly obtained. There was a solution which he had injected into the veins of dead things, and if they were fresh enough, they responded in strange ways. He had had much trouble in discovering the proper formula, for each type of organism was found to need a stimulus especially adapted to it. Terror stalked him when he reflected on his partial failures, nameless things resulting from imperfect solutions or from bodies insufficiently fresh. A certain number of these failures had remained alive. One was in an asylum while others had vanished, and as he thought of conceivable yet virtually impossible eventualities, he often shivered beneath his usual stolidity. West had soon learned that absolute freshness was the prime requisite for useful specimens, and had accordingly resorted to frightful and unnatural expedient in body snatching. In college, and during our early practice together in the factory town of Bolton, my attitude toward him had been largely one of fascinated admiration. As his boldness and methods grew, I began to develop a gnawing fear. I did not like the way he looked at healthy living bodies, and then there came a nightmarish session in the cellar laboratory when I learned that a certain specimen had been a living body when he secured it. That was the first time he had ever been able to revive the quality of rational thought in a corpse, and his success, obtained at such a loathsome cost, had completely hardened him. Of his methods in the intervening 5 years I dare not speak. I was held to him by sheer force of fear, and witnessed sights that no human tongue could repeat. Gradually I came to find Herbert West himself more horrible than anything he did. That was when it dawned on me that his one normal scientific zeal for prolonging life had subtly degenerated into a mere morbid and ghoulish curiosity and secret sense of carnal picturesqueness. His interest became a hellish and perverse addiction to the repellently and fiendishly abnormal. He gloated calmly over artificial monstrosities which would make most healthy men drop dead. From fright and disgust, he became, behind his pallid intellectuality, a fastidious baudelaire of physical experiment, a languid Aglabitus of the tombs. Dangers he met unflinchingly, crimes he committed unmoved. I think the climax came when he had proved his point that rational life can be restored, and had sought new worlds to conquer by experimenting on the reanimation of detached body parts. He had wild and original ideas on the independent vital properties of organic cells and nerve tissue separated from natural physiological systems, and achieved some hideous preliminary results in the form of never-dying, artificially nourished tissue obtained from the nearly hatched eggs of an indescribable tropical reptile. 2 biological points he was exceedingly anxious to settle. First, whether any amount of consciousness and rational action be possible without the brain, proceeding from the spinal cord and various nerve centuries. The second, whether any kind of ethereal, intangible relation distinct from the material cells may exist to link the surgically separated parts of what was previously been a living organism. All this research work required a prodigious supply of freshly slaughtered human flesh, and that was why Herbert West had entered the Great War. The phantasmal, unmentionable thing occurred one midnight in March 1915 in a field hospital behind the lines and at Boy. I wonder even now if I could have been other than a demonic dream of delirium. West had a private laboratory in the east room of the barn-like temporary edifice, assigning him, on his plea that he was devising new and radical methods for the treatment of hopeless cases of maiming. There he worked like a butcher in the midst of his gory wares. I could never get used to the levity with which he handled and classified certain things. At times, he actually did perform marvels of surgery for the soldiers, but his chief delights were of a less public and philanthropic kind, requiring many explanations of sounds which seemed peculiar even amidst the babble of the damned. Among these sounds were frequent revolver shots, surely not uncommon on the battlefield, but distinctly uncommon in a hospital. Dr. West's reanimated specimens were not meant for long existence or a large audience. Besides, human tissue, West employed much of the reptile embryo tissue, which had been cultivated with such singular results. It was better than human material for maintaining life in organless fragments. Organicless? No, organless. Organless fragments. And that was now my friend's chief activity. In a dark corner of the laboratory, over a queer incubating burner, he kept a large covered vat full of his reptile cell matter, which multiplied and grew puffly and hideously. On the night of which I speak, we had a splendid new specimen, a man at once physically powerful and of such high mentality that a sensitive nervous system was assured. It was rather ironic, for he was the officer who had helped West to his commission, and who was now to have been our associate. Moreover, he had in the past secretly studied the theory of reanimation to some extent under West. Major Sir Eric Moreland Clapham Lee, DSO, was the greatest surgeon in our division, and had been hastily assigned to the St. Eloi sector. When news of the heavy fighting reached headquarters, he had come in an aeroplane. Why would you spell it? That's fine. Piloted by the intrepid Lieutenant Ronald Hill.
He's a great
only to be
man, but
shot
he doesn't
down.
know how to spell airplane.
Only to be shot down when directly over his destination. The fall had been spectacular and awful. Hill was unrecognizable afterward. The wreck yielded up the great surgeon in a nearly decapitated, otherwise intact condition. West had greedily seized the lifeless thing, which had once been his friend and fellow scholar, and I shuddered when he finished severing the head, placed it in its hellish vat of pulpy reptile tissue to preserve for future experiments, and proceeded to treat the decapitated body on the operating table. He injected new blood, joined certain veins, arteries, and nerves at the headless neck, and closed the ghastly aperture with engrafted skin from an unidentified specimen which had borne an officer's uniform. I knew what he wanted. To see if this highly organized body could exhibit, without its head, any of the signs of mental life which had distinguished Sir Eric Moreland Clapham Lee. Once a student of reanimation, the silent trunk was now gruesomely called upon to exemplify it. I can still see Herbert West under the sinister electric light as he injected his reanimating solution into the arm of the headless body. The scene I cannot describe. I should faint if I tried it, for there is a madness in a room full of classified carnal things with blood and lesser human debris almost ankle deep on the slimy floor, and with hideous reptilian abnormalities sprouting, bubbling, and baking over a winking bluish-green specter of dim flame in a far corner of the black shadow. The specimen was West repeatedly observed. The specimen, as West repeatedly observed, had a splendid nervous system. Much was expected of it, and as a few twitching motions began to appear, I could see the feverish interest on West's face. He was ready, I think, to see proof of his increasingly strong opinion that consciousness, reason, and personality can exist independently of the brain. That man has no central cognitive spirit, but is merely a machine of nervous matter, each section more or less complete in itself. In one triumphant demonstration, West was about to relegate the mystery of life to the category of myth. The body now twitched more vigorously, and beneath our avid eyes commenced to heave in a frightful way. The arms stirred disquietingly, and the legs drew up. The various muscles contracted in a repulsive kind of writhing. Then the headless thing threw out its arms in a gesture which was unmistakably one of desperation, an intelligent desperation apparently sufficient to prove every theory of Herbert West. Certainly, the nerves were recalling the man's last act in life, the struggle to get free of the falling air. What followed I shall never positively know. It may have wholly been an hallucination from the shock caused at the instant by a sudden and complete destruction of the building and the cataclysm of German shell fire. Who can gainsay it, since West and I are the only proved survivors? West liked to think that before his recent disappearance, there West liked to think that before his recent disappearance, but there were times when he could not, for it was queer that we both had the same hallucination. The hideous occurrence itself was very simple, notable only for what it implied. The body on the table had risen with a blind and terrible groping, and we had heard a sound. I should not call that sound a voice, for it was too awful, and yet its timbre was not the most awful thing about it. Neither was its message. It had merely screamed, "Jump, Ronald! For God's sake, jump!" The awful thing was at its source, for it had come from a large covered vat in the ghoulish corner of crawling black shadows.
My turn. And we're actually almost done, I believe. When Dr. Herbert West disappeared a year ago, the Boston police questioned me closely. They suspected that I was holding something back, and perhaps suspected graver things. But I could not tell them the truth, because they would not believe it. They knew indeed that West had been connected with activities beyond the credence of ordinary men. For his hideous experiments in the reanimation of dead bodies had long been too extensive to admit of perfect secrecy. But the final soul-shattering catastrophe had elements of demoniac? Fantasy, which makes even me doubt the reality of what I saw. I was West's closest friend and only confidential assistant. We had met years before. Okay, why are we going to keep going through this again? In medical school, and from the first I had shared his terrible research. He had slowly tried to perfect a solution which, injected into the veins of the newly deceased, would restore life, a labor demanding an abundance of fresh corpses, and therefore involving the most unnatural actions. Still more shocking were the products of some of the experiments. Grisly masses of flesh that had been dead, but that West waked to a blind, brainless, nauseous animation. There were the usual results, for in order to reawaken the mind, it was necessary to have specimens so absolutely fresh that no decay could possibly affect the delicate brain cells. This need for very fresh corpses had been West's moral undoing. They were hard to get, and one awful day he had secured his specimen while it was still alive and vigorous. A struggle, a needle, and a powerful alkaloid had transformed it to a very fresh corpse, and the experiment had succeeded for a brief and memorable moment. But West had emerged with a soul calloused and seared, and a hardened eye which sometimes glanced with a kind of hideous and calculating appraisal at men of especially sensitive brain and especially vigorous physique. Toward the last I became acutely afraid of West, for he began to look at me that way. People did not seem to notice his glances, but they noticed my fear, and after his disappearance used that as a bias for some absurd suspicion. West in reality was more afraid than I, for his abominable pursuits entailed a life of furtiveness and dread of every shadow. Partly it was the police he feared, but sometimes his nervousness was deeper and more nebulous, touching on certain inscrutable things into which he had injected a morbid life, and from which he had not seen that life depart. He usually finished his experiments with a revolver, but a few times he had not been quick enough. There was that first specimen on whose rifled grave marks of claws were later seen. There was also that Arkham professor's body, which had done cannibal things before it had been captured and thrust unidentified into a madhouse cell at Softon, where it beat the walls for 16 years. Most of the other possibly surviving results were things less easy to speak of, for in later years West's scientific zeal had degenerated to an unhealthy and fantastic mania, and he had spent his chief skill in vitalizing not entire human bodies, but isolated parts of bodies, or parts joined to organic material other than human. It had become fiendishly disgusting by the time he disappeared. Many of the experiments could not even be hinted at in print. The great war, through which both of us served as surgeons, has intensified this side of West. In saying that West's fear of his specimens was nebulous, I have in mind particularly its complex nature. Part of it came merely from knowing of the existence of such nameless monsters, while another part arose from the apprehension of the bodily harm they might under certain circumstances do to him. Their disappearances added horror to the situation. Of them all the West knew the whereabouts of only one, the pitiful asylum thing. Then there was a more subtle fear, a very fantastic sensation resulting from the curious experiments in the Canadian Army in 1915. West, in the midst of a severe battle, had reanimated Major Sir Eric Morland Clapham Lee, D.S.O., a fellow physician who knew about his experiment and could have duplicated them. The head had been removed so that the possibility of quasi-intelligent life in the trunk might be investigated. Just as the building was wiped out by a German shell, there had been a success. The trunk had moved intelligently and unbelievably to relate. We were both sickeningly sure that articulate sounds had come from the detached head as it lay in a shadowy corner of the laboratory. The shell had been merciful, in a way, but West could never feel as certain as he wished that we two were the only survivors. He used to make shuddering conjectures about the possible actions of a headless physician with the power of reanimating the dead. Gee, I wonder if we've seen that in a movie. West's last quarters were in a venerable house of much elegance, overlooking one of the oldest burying grounds in Boston. He had chosen the place for purely symbolic and fantastically aesthetic reasons, since most of the internments were of the colonial period, and therefore little use to scientists seeking very fresh bodies. The laboratory was in a sub-cellar secretly constructed by imported workmen, and contained a huge incinerator for the quite and complete disposal of such bodies, or fragments and synthetic mockeries of bodies, as might remain from the morbid experiments and unhallowed amusement of the owner. During the evacuation of the cellar, the workmen had struck some exceedingly ancient masonry, undoubtedly connected with the old burying ground, yet far too deep to correspond with any sepulchral Pelge. Sepicular? Therian. After a number of calculations, West decided that represented some secret chamber beneath the tomb of the Avralis, where the last interment had been made in 1768. I was with him. I was with him when he studied the notorious dripping walls laid bare by the spades and mattocks of the men, and was prepared for the gruesome thrill which would attend the uncovering of censured grave secrets. But for the first time, West knew timidly conquered his natural curiosity, and he betrayed his degenerating fibre by ordering the masonry left intact and plastered over. Thus it remained to the final hellish night, part of the walls of the secret laboratory. I speak of West's descendants, but must add that it was a purely mental and intangible thing. Oh, where was I? Outwardly, he was the same to the last, calm, cold, and slightly yellowed-haired, and speckled blue eyes, and the general aspect of youth which years and fears seemed to never change. He seemed calm even when he thought of that clawed grave, and looked over his shoulder, even when he thought of the carnivorous thing that gnawed and pawed at softened bars. The end of Herbert West began one evening in our joint study when he was dividing his curious glances between the newspaper and me. A strange headline item had struck him at the form of a crumpled pages, and a nameless Titan claw had seemed to reach down through 16 years. Something fearsome and incredible had happened at Softon Asylum, 50 miles away, stunning the neighborhood and baffling the police. In the small hours of the morning, a body of silent men had entered the grounds, and their leader had aroused the attendants. He was a menacing military figure, who talked without moving his mouth, and whose voice seemed almost ventriloquially connected with an immense black case he carried. His expressionless face was handsome to the point of radiant beauty, but had shocked the superintendent when the hall light fell on it, for it was a wax face with eyes of painted glass. Some nameless accident had befallen this man. A large man guided his footsteps. A repellent hulk with bluish face seemed half eaten away by some unknown malady. The speaker had asked for the custody of the cannibal monster committed from Arkham 16 years before, and upon being refused, every gave a signal which precipitated a shocking riot. The fiend had been beaten, trampled, and bitten every attendant who did not flee, killing 4 and finally succeeding in the liberation of the monster. Those victims who could recall the event without hysteria swore that the creature had acted less like a man than like an unthinkable automata guided by the wax-faced leader. By the time help could be summoned, every trace of the men and their mad charge had vanished. From the hour of reading this item until midnight, West sat almost paralyzed. At midnight the doorbell rang, startling him fearfully. All the servants were asleep in the attic. As I answered the bell, as I have told the police, there was no wagon in the street, but only a group of strange-looking figures bearing a large square box, which they deposited in the hallway after one of them had grunted in a high, unnatural voice, "Express prepaid." They filed out the house with a jerky tread, and as I watched them go, I had an odd idea that they were turning toward an ancient cemetery on which the back of the house abutted. When I slammed the door after them, Wes came downstairs and looked at the box. It was about 2 feet square and bore West's correct name and present address. It also bore the inscription from Eric Moreland Clapham Lee, St. Oley, Flanders, 6 years before in Flanders, a shelled hospital. There we go. It had fallen upon the headless animated trunk of Dr. Clapham Lee, and upon the detached head, which, perhaps, had uttered articulate sounds. West was not even excited now. His condition was more ghastly. Quickly he said, "It's the finish, but let's incinerate it. Let's incinerate this." We carried the thing down to the laboratory. Listening, I do not remember many particulars. You can imagine my state of mind, but it is a vicious lie to say it was Herbert West's body which I put into the incinerator. We both inserted the whole unopened wooden box, closed the door, and started the electricity. Nor did any sound come from the box, after all. It was West who first noticed the falling plaster on that part of the wall where the ancient tomb masonry had been covered up. I was going to run, but he stopped me. Then I saw the small black aperture, felt a ghoulish wind of ice, and smelled the charnel bowels of a putrescent earth. There was no sound, but just then the electric lights went out, and I saw the outline against some phosphorence of the netherworld, a horde of silent, toiling things which only insanity or worse could create. Their outlines were human, semi-human, fractionally human, and not human at all. The horde was grotesque and heterogeneous. They were removing the stones quietly, one by one, from the centuried wall, and then, as the breach became large enough, they came out into the laboratory, a single file, led by a stalking thing with a beautiful head made of wax. Sort of mad-eyed monstrosity behind the leader seized on Herbert West. West did not resist or utter a sound. Then they all sprang at him and tore him to pieces before my eyes, bearing the fragments away into the subterranean vault of fabulous abominations. West's head was carried off by the wax-headed leader, who wore a Canadian officer's uniform. As it disappeared, I saw that the blue eyes behind the spectacles were hideously blazing with their first touch of frantic, visible emotion. Servants found me unconscious in the morning. West was gone. The incinerator contained only only unidentifiable ashes. Detectives have questioned me, but what can I say? The Sopton tragedy will not connect with West. Not that, nor the man with the box, whose existence they deny. I told them of the vault, and they pointed to the unbroken plaster and laughed. So I told them no more. They imply that I am a madman or a murderer. Probably I'm mad. But I might not be mad if those accursed tomb legions had not been so silent. So that's it. That's the story of Re-Animator.
Yep.
Basically, do not fuck with death because death tends to fuck back.
Something like that.
I will say I like the movies more, but I kind of wish we got a movie more toward the actual story.
Hi. So, something I've noticed, and this happens with a lot of Lovecraftian horror. Lovecraft really, really, really likes to reverse sentence structure, and it completely messes with my flow of reading.
Yeah, I kind of had that issue too.
It's like reading through, if I can find an example really quick from what I read before, it's like, a lot of times I think he's going to go one direction with the sentence, and I'll start reading it that way, and then I have to go back and reread the sentence because it goes a completely different direction.
I think it's
Uh,
just half of him fucking with us.
Well, I think, honestly, what it is he's doing it to try and keep the reader paying attention. Because it always makes me do a double take. But he also does this thing where he reiterates the same thing that we already know several times over.
Well, the reason for that is, I probably should have said that, Re-Animator and a lot of his original stories were done in serials. Like, they get one chapter in a magazine per month. That's why he does that. Because think about it, the next month they may not remember what happened the previous month.
And that makes some sense. But
especially
I wish
because
it could be...
Re-Animator was actually mandatory by his editor, because at the time, Frankenstein was this huge thing. It was like really popular. Everyone was writing about it, so he got forced into writing this, and he was like, "All right, I'll do a Frankenstein story, but I'm gonna do it my own way." He actually hates this story. I remember reading that he really hates this story. Which is kind of a shame. This is one of my favorites.
Well, he does. I mean, other than those two big complaints, those are my key complaints when it comes to Lovecraft horror. And I'm not saying that Lovecraft is bad. I really do enjoy Lovecraftian stories. I love the stories Lovecraft puts out. It's just these two small things with his writing really bug me.
It was
and
like a
in
person,
some
only
ways,
darker.
in some ways, because of this, I actually prefer Stephen King's writing over it. But I know I'm probably in the minority here for that.
No, I know a lot of people that liked his older stories. I like Christine, but that's just me. But I can see what you're saying. But again, you also have to remember, look when Lovecraft was writing. There's a big difference between when Stephen King's, the times that Stephen King writes and the time Lovecraft writes. There was also a different type of writing back then.
Sure.
Also, I think he likes to fuck with the reader.
I mean, that's a fair point, but again, the comparison that I'm making is more in terms of writing style. I don't know that everyone in that day had the same writing style applied to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, I kind of agree with Minuteman with this one. The same way with Stephen King, he writes a good story, but God help him if he makes an ending. Well, I think you can kind of tell with this story that, I don't want to say there wasn't a lot of love with it. It kind of feels like he had to write this, especially when you know for the fact he didn't want to write this story. He was forced into it. That ending was basically, okay, we're ending this shit now. There's no way we can continue it. Although technically could, because we don't know what happened to, of course, to West's body when they took it.
There is one other thing about Lovecraftian stories that really, really bug me. And this is the last complaint I'm really going to make when it comes to these stories. And it's something that I usually excuse Lovecraft of because he usually does it in a way that's intelligent. He likes to take words that we use normally and then apply different endings to them.
Are you talking about the airplane thing?
Well, no. That's just a different spelling. It's a correct spelling. It's just something that he kind of threw in out of the blue. It might even be correct in Old English. I don't know if
I was thinking that, or it looked like maybe German.
But it was, yeah, that's what I was thinking too, was the German spelling, which kind of came out of nowhere, but I had to reread it.
No, sorry guys,
but no,
is not part of this. Sorry.
That's not quite what I was getting at. There are a couple of words he uses specifically, where he like puts ist, like Puritanism ist, or period, or what it was. It was like Puritan. Where is it? See if I can't find it real quick.
Could it be that it was like a word in Old English and stuff?
Well, that's what I'm saying. A lot of this stuff doesn't seem like words that would be in Old English. Puritanism is technically correct, but I don't think that it was a proper word back then. You know what I mean?
I just think he likes screwing with the reader. Honestly, I really think that's just Lovecraft for you.
And like I said, I usually let him in particular get away with this kind of stuff because he usually does it in a way that's intelligent. But it's also something that does bug me whenever I'm reading through and I think, wow, I haven't seen this word used before ever in my life. well, I don't know if that's because either I don't know enough about the English language, or if it's because he's just putting words together that I didn't know anyone had ever put together before. It's
Probably a little side A, probably a little side B.
and it's not that it's really a big deal. I think that kind of creativity in writing is a good thing. Looking at how was his name? Charles, was it Dickens?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he did that kind of. He was also a complete douche.
That. Well, he did the same thing quite a bit, where he'd take words that were kind of that if you put it in that way, makes sense to the reader. So it's okay, but it's not proper.
Well,
I like that. It's creative and original to an extent, but it also bothers me when I'm trying to do a one-time read through and I go, wait a minute, I have to reread that word. I've never seen that before.
It's called Let's See If Anyone Will Notice.
Oh, trust me, Lovecraft. I've noticed.
He's secretly going after you, Lovecraft. You watch your dead ass.
And in that regard, I typically, because of that, I tend to prefer the kind of writings that Stephen King puts out over that. But I'm sure I'm probably in the minority with that. I really like Stephen King's writings. I know not everyone does.
Again, I know a lot of people that do. My only real complaint about saying that is, again, you're talking about two different time periods of writers, and that may be the reason that Lovecraft writes the way he does. We'd have to look at other writing from that time period that he was writing in.
Well, and that's quite possible, and it's a fair point to make. I'm just not certain that the time period is so far that it would dictate between what is considered proper and not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I would have to go and see what the Old English was.
Because I was also going to say, if we're going to argue that, you can also very easily argue words change. And no, we're not talking about cisgender and bullshit, but actual words change spellings and meanings over years. So it can also be that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That could be it. I'm not sure that there's enough time in there for that to really, really take place. Well,
I mean, look at how gay and queer in this one. Like, queer in this one is weird. And nowadays, if you use queer, you'd be saying gay.
Well, sure, yeah. Of course, there's always going to be slang, and it's going to be different from what the original proper usage was. But what I'm really getting at more is more of a subjective view. I'm not objectively saying King is better than Lovecraft. I'm saying subjectively, I prefer this writing because of this.
No, that's fine. You can. I'm not trying to argue it and saying, oh, Lovecraft's better than King. Don't get me wrong here. It's one of those things, and maybe it's because I took things like animation history and stuff, and it was kind of pounded into our head. You have to look at the time something is done, like it was written or it was animated or something like that, and don't compare it to something newer unless they're like maybe 10, 20 years apart, because you got too much of a gap there. And things change over time, so comparing Stephen King to Lovecraft, let's admit it, he got a lot of his shit from Lovecraft and others. I'm not saying he ripped it off. He's not. Fuck, did I almost say Tolkien? I meant to say, oh shit. Someone's gonna beat my ass for that one. I meant the bitch that wrote Harry Potter. What's her name?
You mean Rowling?
Thank you. Oh, I'm never gonna live that down.
Nope.
Where's
But I liked Harry Potter. What's wrong with Harry Potter?
Read Lord of the Rings and read Harry Potter, and tell me how much of it comes from the other one.
And?
She claims to be original, and she's not. All of her shit's been stolen from something else. Also, there are people that... I want to say... I don't want to say it, but I'm going to. There are people that think Lord of the Rings stole from Harry Potter. Makes me sick. How could you? I'm so sorry. Read any fantasy book and see how much he took from everything, yes. King is the M. Night of horror stories. I'm staying the fuck out of that argument.
M. Night Shyamalan Ding Dong?
I could probably stand some of King's. Cause I liked Pet Sematary. I liked,
Shyamalan Ding Dong. Sorry.
No, that's actually... No, you can look it up. There is actually somebody that tweeted that out, and they were dead serious about the Lord of the Rings thing.
No, I mean
Yeah.
the reason why I thought it was so funny was M Night Shyamalan.
M. Night Shyamalan Ding Dong.
It's fantastic.
What a twist!
What a please.
God, his movies suck. Can we all just agree on that?
I don't remember any.
I've been forced to watch most of them, and I keep pissing off King Leak by going, his movies suck.
I know how to piss him off now.
Oh, God, yeah. Oh, what was it? There's like 2 of M. Night Shyamalan's movies he really, really likes, and I keep shitting on them.
No. You have to call him M. Night Shyamalan Ding Dong.
Night Shyamalan Ding Dong.
Do that to Leak next time. So you got any Shyamalan Ding Dong movies?
No, because he'll actually bring them and torture me.
Hang on. What's his name in Discord? I gotta put it in
King
the chat.
Leak?
No, well, I guess that's true. Let's see.
Fucking weirdo. Yeah, it was fucking weird. I wasn't a huge fan of it. We went into weird tangents. I'm sorry, Toast. Were you making a point?
No, not particularly. I was just.
I completely lost what the point was supposed to be after Shamalama Ding Dong.
We were. Wow, really? H.P. Lovecraft died at the age of 46? I thought he was older than that. Damn, he died young. Also, he's not from New York, guys. He's from Rhode Island. You guys are thinking of Poe. Poe's from New York.
No, I was just giving my thoughts and opinions on the writing style.
Yeah,
The
no, I can
stories
see
themselves
what
are
you mean
fantastic.
about it bugging you, though. I can agree with that, because there was a couple of points you noticed. I was like, what? What is this word? Wait till we do Clive Barker.
There we go.
No, I'm excited for Barker.
Yeah, we'll probably start Barker tomorrow. Cause we'll probably do about 3 chapters of that, because you're reading the first chapter.
There we go.
I have read
told
that
him.
book at least 9 times. In fact, I have it here on my shelf in big letter form because I love it. And I can read it easier.
I just sent it through General saying that you wanted to bring some M. Night Shyamalan Ding Dong movies.
Please don't!
I already did it. Too late.
Oh god, I'm so glad he's at a wedding right now.
Ah, damn!
I guess he did live in New York for a little while.
I've got a Conan sleeping in my lap.
Oh, he lived in Brooklyn. Nigga, that's my area. Oh shit, I actually know where he used to live too.
Nice.
I guess I should ask what exact book are we going to be reading from Clive?
The Hellbound. I thought we'd start with the Hellbound Heart. The first of the Cenobite books, which I need to find out if the final one ever got released. Cenobite. No one fucking correct me. I can send you it. I have the PDF for it. I would ask Shadow if he wants to join us, but it may get too spooky, and we don't want to scare him.
Hey, fuck off.
It's a little scary, Shadow. Do you think you can handle that?
Scary blue. I dealt with fucking Outlast. And Outlast 2.
Alright, I have like 3 or 4 PDFs for this, so actually this might be better because it's a big print PDF.
Did you ever have Shadow go through Resident Evil 7?
No, that reminds me, Shadow!
Fuck! Toad!
Toad is the one that bought it for you.
Look, I really like Resident Evil 7. It's a really good game.
I like the Resident Evil series. They're not bad, but...
Shadow?
Yeah.
Please do it for Halloween.
I gotta work Halloween.
Please do it for the weekend.
We'll see what happens.
Yay. Please, before I have to go off.
Alright, fine.
And when are we going to do I Have No Mouth in My I'm gonna Scream the game?
I was thinking probably when I'm healed up after surgery. Because I won't have time to fully do it before then. You can, if you want, I can give you the stream keys and you can stream it while I'm gone. You have the game, right?
I do have the game. I'm just thinking, I think your fans wanted to watch you play it. So
I
as
don't
much as I
mind
would
doing
want
it.
to-
They have to wait till I get back because I've got maybe not even 3 weeks before I have to go, and I'm doing nothing but basically test before the surgery. That's why I'm never home during the day.
No, I understand. I'm just saying that no one comes to Purity Sin's YouTube channel to watch Divine Toast play things. You know?
Because they haven't
that's
gotten the
okay.
chance to see you. They come for Shadow.
Yeah, don't know why. I suck at games.
Oh, Shadow, you should have Toast with you when you play Resident Evil 7.
Alright.
Then you won't have to scream like too much of a bitch.
I can go
Oh, I get
commentate,
this.
and I can relax you, give you shoulder rubs as you're getting spooked,
Aww.
kind of calm you down a little,
Nope.
you know.
Nope. Nope. I'm already thinking of your replacement. Anyway.
I'll even be there to laugh in the background.
It's gonna be great.
Just think, Shadow, it'll be the best thing ever before I go get half my fucking stomach removed. Oh, somebody said they came to watch Toast. Somebody else said Toast is their fetish. We ignore that person. I have to see if he's going to be free to actually join us tomorrow, since he's our replacement until King Lee comes back, so we at least have one Nick on the channel. Oh, guys, I totally doxed him.
That's his name?
Yes!
Why the fuck didn't I know that?
I've only used his actual name for a while. I have no idea how you didn't know.
Probably didn't care.
I know your real name.
Yeah, no.
I did
It's
not
'cause
even know you had a real name, honestly.
That's because I go by so many names and so many voices. You never know.
At least I found out your real one.
Yep.
And no, guys, I'm not going to tell you it.
They can find out anyway if they look hard enough.
Yeah.
It's on one of your videos, so...
Yeah, but they'd have to know what they're looking for. And also, I spelled your name wrong.
No, you didn't.
Oh, I thought you said I did. I know I spelled
No,
John St. Or no, I didn't. Our animator accidentally spelled John St. John's name wrong, so we had to fix it.
No, you spelled my name right.
Woohoo! I think Minuteman wants to butter some toast.
Lewd. Chat's getting a little bit too lewd for me, guys.
Oh, I think they want to watch you now, Toast. I think you might have some fans.
So,
Yay.
I can always set you up with the XSplit and all that if you need it.
well, I mean, if something that they want to do, I'm more than happy to stream it. I used to do that in RPG horror games all the time.
Well, there you go, guys. So at least while I'm gone for a few weeks, you have Shadow and you have Toast.
Yep. I have a cat.
He has
You won't
no
get off
pussy.
my lap.
Oh, you know what? No, I did just get my capture card.
There you go.
Huh. I could do a lot.
You guys won't even miss me.
I don't know about that.
Maybe, maybe I'll pop in when I'm recovering. Well, I'll probably try to.
You are the main attraction, so.
Aww.
Yep.
Don't try to butter me up, Toast. That's what we do to you.
Yeah, they don't come here for my ass.
Shadow, you're not helping your case.
I know. I don't want to help my case. Why should I help my case?
Or remember King Leek's name because he's forgetful. He says so.
Yeah.
Okay, to be fair, I've been friends with King Leek for 16 years. Probably a lot longer. I barely remembered his name till we started dating. That's the only fucking reason I know his name was I had to remember it whenever he texted me. Of course you'll miss you. I'll try to pop in. I'm at least going to be on Twitter when I'm able to, and when I wake up and shit, I'll put out a message on Twitter that I'm alive. And more than likely, at least you guys will get a text when I'm awake, so.
Good. We'll keep you guys updated for sure.
Dating a guy for a year. Who the hell is that guy? Actually, we dated for 5 years, and I know his name. Who the hell is that guy? No, that's only because I kept forgetting his actual name. I know Toast's real name, too.
I can see it now. Good morning, baby. Who the fuck are you? King Leek.
That would be...
Oh!
Okay.
My.
So one of the things, I'm going to tell this story because I know King Leek's never going to listen because he's at a wedding, and he'll never listen to this later on. I can't be called the most forgetful motherfucker in this group because he freaked out over a game once. He was so happy. He was so happy it was going to come out. He was like searching all the info and stuff. And then when the game came out, he was so excited. And he goes, I didn't even know this was coming out. And I'm like, dude, you were going nuts about that a year ago. I don't remember that. Never gonna let him forget that one.
That's okay. I'm very forgetful.
Speaking of
Works
which,
in my-
there's a lot of good games coming out soon that I'm really excited for.
I know I gotta go pre-order the new Dragon Ball one.
Oh yeah,
I'm
Fighter
good.
Z does look good. I was talking about Mario Odyssey.
Go
Fuck
fuck
that.
yourself.
It's looking pretty
Send me a
great.
fucking Switch.
I'm going for Final Fantasy VII Remake. That, and I'm still waiting.
That thing's
on the
actually coming out?
DLC. Yeah, it's coming out in December. December
Oh,
the
crud.
24th, I
Really?
think,
Of what year?
this year.
No, hold on.
Final Fantasy VII Remake release date. Let's see. I know I saw it on Amazon. Amazon PS4.
I guess they just... Did they really just announce it?
This item will be released on December 29th, 2017. Pre-order now. But that's Amazon, so let's go
Yeah, I was gonna say, don't trust Amazon.
GameStop. Let's go GameStop.
Final Fantasy reveals new Switch Nintendo Switch reveal. Release date. Here we go. Sooner than we thought. God, this thing's been in development since 2015.
Yeah.
Just give me the fucking date. Stop talking about bullshit. Reveal that, yeah, it's supposed to be... Titles to be revealed. Okay. However, our prediction is... Okay, so they're going to reveal it in December of 2017. They don't have an official date. The date's going to be revealed in December. Enjoy that, cock tease.
No. No, it's gonna be released. It better be released. I will fucking dropkick the bitch for it.
I want to Switch. It'd be nice to play
Oh.
while I'm in the hospital.
Let me ask, chat, how excited are you guys for Sonic Forces? How's that one looking?
Oh god, I want to stream that just because it looks fucking awful. It
It's,
looks edgy as fuck.
Tatsu, why are you yelling at me to go ahead and make you some fried chicken? I do make good fried
Because
chicken.
you're a black
That's
man.
beside the point. That's beside the point.
Also, Sonic Forces is coming out for the Switch.
Fuck
Yeah.
that. I'm gonna get that game only just so I can rip on it so goddamn hard.
Oh, but I saw you in it, you edgehog.
You get a
Oh,
free
cool.
DLC.
You're not even worth paying for.
Still waiting on that Shadow 2 game.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for Shadow 1 to ever become good.
It was good. I beat it 100%.
We'll probably do Sonic Forces because it looks fucking terrible. I wonder which one will be more broken, that one or South Park.
Right. I couldn't tell you. Sonic games have been all kind of trash lately, except for Mania.
Which was actually made by the fans.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, did you see? What
there
was
are
it?
people
Shin
out there-
Megami Tensei 5. It's gonna be released on Switch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the Shin Megami Tensei game.
I want to play one. I've never played one. I like that Persona 5 game, and I gotta get Persona 4.
They had one out. Which one was it? It was an MMO actually for it, and I had a lot of fun on it. I don't remember what it was called though. I ran around with a pistol shooting monsters. It was awesome.
Don't lie, it's because he's black.
Wait, what?
So, people are probably going to hate me for saying this, but if Sonic games wanted to be good, at least the 3D ones, they are going to have to go back to a formula that's similar to Sonic 06.
You mean not be programmed?
It was programmed for the most part. It's
Look,
just
where?
the loading.
Can you show me
Sonic
where the programming
06
was?
I beat that game too. Jesus.
Sonic 06 had two key gameplay aspects that made the game more fun, ironically, than most of the new Boost gameplay. One of those things is being a puzzle platformer in the form of silver stages. And another one of those things is Sonic stages But Sonic stages were really put together with really bad level design and really broken programming. Like if you could play as fast Sonic as being as fast as he can actually go, a realistic kind of speed, I think it'd be a lot of fun over a large open area and not over precision platforming. You know what I mean?
There is a phone game out there called Sonic World, I think.
Yes, Sonic World.
Actually,
I've heard about this.
It was not bad.
You know, Sonic 06 was the first game I ever got for my PlayStation 3. And the only game I had for a few months.
I'm sorry.
I was too.
I have an Xbox 360 sitting here at my house because my friend loves Sonic 06. And I mean that in the most ironic way possible. He only loves to speedrun it because it's absolutely broken. If you can beat the game in 15 minutes, it's
Lord.
So, I mean, he taught me how to speedrun Silver's story, and I literally can do it in 15 minutes. It's hilarious. I love it. But it's awful. It's fantastic, but it's also awful because of how broken it is. I mean, I have the Xbox 360, and the only game I have for it at all is Sonic 06 sitting here in my room.
I've got a 360, a GameCube, a PS3, and a PS4.
It's no use.
Needless to say, I hate silver.
Yeah. I never got very far in the game. I actually only got my PlayStation 3 because of the Destroy All Humans game that I had to end up fucking importing from Europe because it didn't come out in America because they canceled it literally a week before it was supposed to release.
Oh, jeez.
I wonder why THQ went down.
The only opinions I'm seeing in chat are irrelevant in the 90s, and it's for gay furries, which, that's what it should be. That's pretty much par for the course. What is there to reply to?
Excuse me? Fuck you!
We've got Sonic Mania. That's fantastic, but it's like the last thing since the 90s that's good.
I thought Sonic Generations was okay.
Oh, yeah, Sonic Generations was a good game.
Sonic Generations was bullshit.
Well, I mean, overall, Sonic
game.
Generations is a good game. I
All
thought
right,
it was
you
a very
autistic
well
little
done
furry.
game.
How did that piss you off?
The final fucking boss fight.
Yeah, that was kind of bullshit.
I never got to beat it. I never beat that fucking thing. The fucker. You can't hit it. I got good.
No, apparently you didn't.
Get better.
Hey, fuck you. I'm good.
See, keep offering it to toast, man. Keep offering that ass to toast.
Shut the fuck up, Purity. Tatas.
Yeah, what's your point? At least I'm not offering my ass a toast like you are. You already owe him 2 blowjobs. You want to keep it going?
Why the hell 2?
Because he put $200 in.
Are you fucking crazy?
All for you, Shadow.
I hate you.
What's your favorite fried food? I can't eat fried food right now, but if I could, it'd probably be... Is pork fried rice considered fried? Shut up. I just realized the answer. I should not be doing
pork
this.
Fried rice considered fried? No, it's boiled.
Fuck off, you fucking hedgehog.
My night is complete.
My favorite fried food? I don't know.
Fried fruit?
I didn't know that was
fried fruit?
Well, actually it is.
That sounds nasty.
They've got deep fried Oreos.
You know what? If I still had a gallbladder, I'd be in pain right now.
Why?
You do know fried food sets off gallbladders, right?
Nope.
Well, everything does.
Do I look like a doctor?
Thank God not, or we'd all be screwed. You'd be Dr. West, alright.
Move your dead bones.
Oh, God damn it.
I don't try a
Fuck
lot.
off every single... I like that we just got a patron for me being retarded.
Of course.
But I don't eat a lot of fried food, so there's no way I could answer that question. I don't even eat deep fried food. I don't. I find it too
deep
greasy.
fried food is nasty.
The fuck do you think KFC is?
I don't eat KFC. Dude, I barely eat out. In fact, I won't be after this week. I have to go shopping. Hi, Miko Dico. Hi, Smizio Miko. Hi. Are you all wrapped up in my shirt? Am I not gonna be able to wear that tomorrow? Nope.
I can multitask like a motherfucker.
Imagine Dr. Shadow. Nobody. I looked in the chat really quick, and I thought it said nipples instead of pineapples.
What?
Oh,
I'm
dear.
tired. Can you tell?
Just a little.
So are you, apparently, Mr.
Ah.
Johnny.
It's because it's 12:30 in the morning. Christ.
Should we call the stream?
I don't care. I can go for 30 more minutes. I've been sitting here hunting fucking ditto.
I've been sitting here with a little puppy wuppy on my arm.
See, that's how I prefer most of my food is grilled. I like doing grilled and barbecue.
I have to buy like a little tiny grill.
I thought you were going to say that's how I prefer my food on my own.
Delicious.
Mm-hmm.
Is
Boiled
it yummy?
chicken's pretty.
That yummy arm chicken.
I don't have any problem with boiled chicken.
Oh no, I make a damn good chicken soup.
I gotta look up some stuff to cook, starting at the end of this week. I have to get that list to you, Toast. I gotta type that shit up.
What I did is I took chicken. I just boiled a pot of like thighs and legs, stripped the bones afterwards, left the water in the pot, boiled the noodles in that same water, added some white pepper gravy, some seasoned salt, and a lot of pepper, and corn, and I think green beans.
Charcoal grills do have a distinct taste to them, and that's usually what I like to use. I really like grilled chicken, and I really like grilling hamburgers.
Toast, come grill shit for me.
Mmm.
Bring
I don't
That
grill.
grill.
require going to Florida.
I don't grill. I have.
Take my hand, we'll make it somehow.